Hello everyone, I'm Santiago and today I'm going to be testing the Fallout franchise on the ROG Ally. So this is my first ROG Ally video. If you want to check it out on Steam Deck, there's a link in the pinned comment because I already tested all these on that console as well. So we're going to do Fallout 1 all the way to Fallout 76, and I'm going to give you some recommendation across the way, so let's get started right away. Alright, so for the first Fallout, it's pretty quick. You go into Options, Screen Settings, you can use your fingers, but really this game doesn't have Gamepad support. It's an old PC game. 1080p, so native resolution, 2x scaling, and that's basically it. So for reference, for this game, since it's super light on resources, we're using the 10 watt silent mode. And what to say, according to this, almost a full charge, we get 190 minutes of battery, so that's better than most games, of course. It's using like 13 watts. And why do I hate playing this on the ROG Ally? Well, pretty simple. This game doesn't have gamepad support, and the ROG Ally doesn't have a gamepad at all, a trackpad. So it's not like you can use, like on the Steam Deck, the trackpad to move the cursor around. You got to use the sticks, which is pretty uncomfortable. You can also use your hands instead. And as you can see, the frame rate when I move the mouse increases to like 100. It seems to be just an issue with the FPS counter in this game. Happened with many PCs as well. For Fallout 2, same order of business, 2x scaling, 1080p, hit done. And like in the previous game, no gamepad support, so I recommend plugging in a mouse and keyboard. You can use the sticks as the mouse using the desktop controls on the Asus app. Armory crate. But honestly, there's so little precision using sticks as mice, that really I wouldn't play the first ones like this on the ROG Ally. I would just plug in a mouse and keyboard if you're using a monitor. Otherwise, it's very, very uncomfortable to play like this. Again, I wish we had trackpads for this. For Fallout Tactics, I had to use 720p because there's no scaling option like in the previous games. And also the FPS counter doesn't show up. This happened on all my computers for this. And well, what to say? Just like before, you can use the sticks as a mouse using the desktop controls from Armory Crate. Or you can use a mouse and keyboard, although, I mean, yeah, just like the previous ones. Just the lack of gamepad support is what makes it very hard to recommend on the ROG Ally. For Fallout 3, I installed some mods that I left in the description. One of them tells the game that we have an old GPU, so it doesn't crash on startup. We're using 1080p, 2x MSAA, ultra settings, but in the advanced settings, disable transparency multi-sampling. That helps quite a bit for some reason. And one more thing, in the command center, make sure the refresh rate is at 60 Hz. Otherwise, the game goes above 60 and it crashes for me, despite all the mods that I installed that are to avoid crashes. So make sure to keep it like that. And there's also a 720p option if you want to have longer battery life. But let's start with 2x MSAA on 1080p. We're into the game, and as you can see, we're using like 21 watts of power, 25. So we're not going to hit more than 90 minutes of battery, probably, which is kind of a disappointment. And when I get close to transparencies, I can drop into the mid-50s sometimes. Maybe it's a thing with DirectX 9 games and how they use maybe 1 or 2 cores. So probably if you put turbo mode, it's going to be more stable. And 720p as well. Welcome back, we're now at 720p, again with 60 Hz, and we are at a similar wattage, now 22. Hopefully it doesn't jump into the 30 watt range. Of course, the game is way blocked here. You maybe want to use 4x MSAA. But yeah, the wattage is not that different actually. We'll see if it jumps to 30 watts in a moment, but man, it uses way more power than I anticipated. Again, maybe because it's an older game, the X9, maybe uses the hardware differently. So for the smaller screen, 720p should still be good enough. 1080p maybe is a little bit too much if you're playing on battery. If you're playing plugged in, you can actually just put the operating mode to turbo and it's going to be more stable, because I see that the GPU usage increases quite significantly when I'm on 1080p, which makes complete sense. So if you're playing with a charger plugged in or in turbo mode draining battery like crazy, you get 60s no problem. But if you're playing at 15 watts and want to actually play this on the go, 720p is the way to go. You're going to have 24 watts, so probably we're talking about 90 minutes of battery before we jump into New Vegas. Do what everybody does at some point. Not a single hit. Okay, one hit. Good. Reduce 2 atoms. Okay, let's go full headshots. So at 720p, I would say if you want to play portably, probably 720p with 2 times MSAA, and you should be good to go. Otherwise, you're not going to have great battery life. But if you don't care about battery life, put the ROG Ally in turbo mode and play on 1080p. You're going to still have 60s, but battery life probably an hour tops. For Fallout New Vegas, these are the mods that I installed. So some of them are for higher frame rates, so the game doesn't speed up and crash. Then for the settings, I'm basically using 1080p at the start, 2 times MSAA. And in the advanced options, I only turned off transparency multi-sampling. So let's get into the game. Welcome to New Vegas. We're using turbo mode. If you're plugged in to power with the official charger, you should have a little bit more wattage. But if you're using a charger, be ready to have 1 hour of battery. If you're on battery. And as you can see, similar issue to Fallout 3. But we stay at 60 way more often. Okay, he didn't care, I guess. But as you can see, the explosions and all that drop our frame rate no matter what we do. Yeah, special explosions. And we use a very high wattage, so the battery is not going to last very long. So probably if you're playing in a portable fashion, you do not want to use 1080p. Despite the age of the game, because otherwise you're going to have less than 1 hour of battery. The alternative is to use the performance mode on your battery, but you're going to drop a few extra frames. Again, I don't know what's wrong, older games, all the good stuff. So 1080p only if you're plugged in with the official charger, I would say, and play on turbo mode. Let's jump into 720p. What about the battery usage? Apparently it's 30 watts, so a little bit over an hour. Yeah, an hour and 20 minutes maybe. Right now we're at 59% battery, that's why it says 46 minutes. You can also improve battery life by locking the frame rate to 60. So if you can do that, like I'm doing right now, it's going to be using way less power. Just give it a few seconds for it to update. I don't know why the power thing takes so long to update. But we should be using less than 32 watts, definitely. Especially with the 60 FPS cap. Oh my god, my aim with the controller. But as you can see at 720p, when transparencies show up, we don't get as many drops below 60. It's basically perfectly at 60 across the board. So that would be my advice. Play at 720 with a 60 FPS cap or select 60 Hz on your screen. And since you have VRR, locking the frame rate to 60 will keep it inside the VRR window, so you're not going to have any screen tearing on your Ally's screen. But Fallout 3 and New Vegas have that issue. If you're playing docked and want like 100 FPS, well, 720p, plug it into the official charger, select the 30-watt turbo mode, and you should be closer to there. But if you want decent battery life, put it on performance mode, 720p, and you should be good to go with that 60 FPS lock. Under 30 watts, and it still looks pretty good. Just make sure to install those mods that I left in the description. Those are pretty useful. For Fallout 4, in the options, we're using 1080p for the turbo experience. So just to show you that 1080p is doable, basically these settings, on view distance we have it like this, basically high. And the shadow distance I would say is the most important setting. If you want 60s even on Boston, you need this on medium. So yeah, I'll probably for 1080p keep this on medium to hit 60 FPS or mostly there. So let's get into it right away. Fallout 4 recently got yet another update, so broke mods, but the mods inside the game that you can get directly from the Bethesda servers do still work, so I'll show you the ones that I recommend. The unofficial Fallout 4 patch, that's one of them. I'm going to update it. Then Wakeless Junk, Enhanced Blood Textures, and See-Through Scopes is just a thing that I recommend having. Just some extra stuff. So let's get back into the game. Welcome to Fallout 4. As I told you before, we are on 30 watts turbo, so we're connected to the charger. That's why I'm targeting 1080p. And as you can see, even with the shadow distance on the medium setting, that the shadow distance is pretty poor, we're still dropping into the 40s and 50s in Diamond Cities, well, outside Diamond City, which is pretty common. Even on the consoles it happens. But due to the VRR on the screen, you're not going to get any screen tearing, so that's pretty good. So as you can see, the GPU is not fully utilized. It's an engine game thing limitation. If you're playing plugged in, you can expect something like this. If you unplug the charger, you're going to have like, how much battery life? Less than an hour of battery using these settings. So just for, instead of the 70s, you drop into the mid 40s in the demanding part here, using the performance preset. Again, turbo, if you're docked, connected to a charger. Otherwise, you're going to have less than an hour of battery. And you're playing at 1080p. But there is one more thing that you can do that is super interesting. That is enabling AFMF, or frame generation, from the Radeon control panel. So once you have the overlay all set up, in my case top right corner, to see the real frame generated frame rate, make sure this is enabled for Fallout 4 in the gaming tab, and it will say active. If it says anything different, like the game is not supporting it or something like that, either the game is not DX11 or the game doesn't support this for any other reason. One thing that I noticed that breaks the frame generation is the real-time monitor of the Armory Crate overlay. So keep in mind that if you enable this, the frame generation won't work. So what I'm doing right now, at the left you can see the real frame rate, and at the right you can see at the top right the frame rate with the frame generation. Am I in turbo mode? Yes, I am. And as you can see, I have 46 FPS, but the frame rate generated is 90 FPS, since we are inserting a generated frame in between each frame. And why am I not putting high shadow draw distance, considering it basically doubles the frame rate? Well, that's a good question. The reason is that when the game drops to 30 FPS in these locations with shadow distance on high, At 30 FPS, the frame generation feels terrible to play. So this is a nice bonus because we hit 50 to 60 like this. And with frame generation, we almost reached the screen's refresh rate, which is like 90 to 100 FPS. But as you can see, 1080p, maybe a little bit too much. If you want 120, consider using turbo mode at 720p. So 1080p, it is like that. Just keep in mind that frame generation has a hit to performance. That's why if we turn it off, we're going to be over 50 basically all the time, even with turbo enabled. So that's something important to mention. But with the frame generation, we're into the 90 to 100 FPS range like before. Let me very quickly toggle AFMF off just to show you the performance difference. So now with frame generation disabled, we are hitting 60s way more often. So we get a 10 extra real FPS, to say it in some way, on 1080p. Remember, this is not 720, this is actually 1080p. For a handheld, I think that's super impressive. So let's do 720p and some battery testing. Alright, so now we're at 720p with the turbo mode. Basically without a power source, we're directly on battery, and as you can see at the top right corner, we're using 44 watts. So less than an hour of battery is completely ridiculous, so please don't do this. We're at 76 FPS in here, one of the most demanding parts. So looking pretty good. If you want 60 FPS, over 60 basically all the time, use this, but it will drain your battery. So I recommend you plug it in if you want to use this mode. But what about performance, which is 15 watts, which means basically an hour of battery? Well, we drop into the 50s, similar to what 1080p gave us with the Ally plugged in. We use a couple watts more actually, so maybe it's not 100% worth it. But with 30 watts of power, you're basically looking at maybe 80 to 90 minutes of battery, an hour and a half. So yeah, pretty freaking good in my opinion, considering it's a ROG Ally and we're playing Fallout 4 at 6 FPS. So we're close to the beginning of the game now, less demanding, 15 watts instead of the turbo mode. 720p, 120 Hz, so we're inside the VRR window. And again, if you play on turbo mode, you're going to get less than an hour battery, but higher frame rates, maybe into the 70 FPS range. But if you care about battery life, you probably should keep it like this. As you can see, the wattage is 25 watts, so 5 watts less than in the demanding part. So I'm guessing 90 minutes of battery. And as long as it doesn't drop below 45 FPS, you should be inside the VRR window and have a good amount of battery life. So yeah, I think it's pretty good like this if you want to have 90 minutes of battery. So it says 55 FPS, but at the top right corner you can see that we're getting actually over 100 FPS because it's basically generating a frame in between. So you're closer to the refresh rate, the native refresh rate of the ROG Ally. It uses more power, but you get a smoother looking image with some ghosting sometimes, especially if the frame rate drops below 60, but as long as it doesn't hit 30s, you should be good enough. But as you can see, the top right corner, I mean, on the smaller screen, 720p, I think is ideal. Not sure why they put a 1080p screen on this portable machine. And you should have like 90 minutes of battery, a little bit less using frame generation, but I mean, the results are there. You cannot deny it. Not sure why the frame gen lag shows nothing. I can see some of the crosshairs has some ghosting to it, but it's it's not that noticeable because we have 60 frames. It has a lot of information to make a fake frame in the middle. So yeah, super impressive. For Fallout 76, I'm going to show you once again two settings, 1080p with these settings. And the target will be 30 FPS because it runs worse than Fallout 4. So let's get into it. So now we're playing Fallout 76 1080p connected to the charger, so we have the turbo mode, as you can see, because it eats battery if you're playing like that portably. And we're targeting 30 FPS. Unfortunately, yeah, you're not getting super stable frame rates on this one, even at the lowest settings. But we're playing at 1080p on a handheld, so kinda to be expected. It's not perfect, but it's playable. Frame generation, on this one I do not recommend it, at least not on 1080p, just because we're into the 30s and 40s. If you use frame generation, the latency, I mean visually and latency wise, it doesn't work super well. So yeah, if you're plugged in, do 1080p, you'll get, as you can see, over 30. And if you're unplugged from the battery, expect less than an hour of battery playing like this. And we are closer to 40, but most people should play at the 15 watt option just because of battery life. So at least you have less wattage. We're at 30 watts at the moment. So we are probably looking at 80 to 90 minutes of battery. As you can see, the frame rate is still about 30. But this game really doesn't run super well by itself. I mean, as you could see, from 1080p to 720p, we got like, what, 10 FPS more? And I'm in a place where it drops frames randomly, so it's closer to the 60 FPS target, so you set into the 40s inside the VRR range more often. As you get farther away from the city, you're going to the small town, better said. You're going to have more consistent performance, but it's not perfect. But it works, so runs worse than Fallout 4, and in my opinion looks worse than Fallout 4, but that's Fallout 76 for you. So the Fallout franchise on the Steam Deck, what do I think? I think that Fallout 4 is super impressive. Fallout 3 and New Vegas disappointed me on the battery usage side. But then otherwise, I love that in Fallout 4 you can use frame generation and get hundreds of FPS, which realistically is 50 to 60, but portably I will play at 720p. But if you plug it to the charger, you can do 1080p. And if you mix 1080p with frame generation in Fallout 4, it's actually pretty cool when plugged in. Uses more power, but as long as you're plugged into the wall, you should be good. Pretty good experience. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did testing the ROG Ally for the first time. It's also nice to have frame generation. It's just very low battery life. So thank you for watching, and I'll see ya next time. Bye guys.